Wepa! Now, after the success of Sunset Boulevard and his Shakespeare season, Jamie Lloyd has decided to dip back into his back catalogue and remount his 2019 production of Evita. This was last seen at the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. It was initially going to get a transfer to the Barbican the following year, but sadly COVID ruined those plans, so it makes a lot of sense why Jamie Lloyd has now returned to Evita. This is the production of the summer. Everyone has been speaking about Evita, but now that I have seen the musical, and I will say for the record, it is one of my favourite Angela Lloyd musicals, how do I feel about Jamie Lloyd's Evita? Did everything click for me? What didn't work? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie. I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet, as you can tell. With all of this, I do reviews, I do discussions, I do versus brackets, rankings, game shows, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps the channel. But let's dive in to Jamie Lloyd's Evita. I have a lot to say about Evita. This is going to be a long review. And it's also going to be a review where I'm going to have to quite directly speak about a lot of the choices in direction that this production takes. I'm going to be speaking about a lot of the plot points of Evita. I'm going to be speaking about how they reinvent things. I'm going to try my best to be vague, but this review will have spoilers for choices throughout, because I just can't speak about it spoiler-free. If that doesn't bother you, fantastic. Let's continue with this review. Now, I love Evita. I think the peaks of Evita make up for some of the moments that I don't really love in the text and the material of it, but on the whole, it's a great musical. I think it contains some of the best music Angela Lloyd has crafted for a musical. I think the way that it tackles Eva Peron's story is really interesting. I mean, it makes sense that Evita and Jesus Christ Superstar are my favourite Angela Lloyd musicals, because they're both musicals with two really cool performers kind of just battling it out between each other. These two different worldviews contrasted. With Jesus Christ Superstar, that's Jesus and Judas, and with Evita, that is Eva Peron and Shay. It's a musical that tackles a lot of politics and deals with some very heavy source material, and tackling a political leader who has had a lot of admiration and a lot of contention. Someone who is so widely beloved by the people of Argentina despite the negative effects of her tenure, or more so, her partner's tenure. Well, she's never going to be vice president now, never going to be vice president now. The lasting effects of Peron's time in office and Evita's time alongside him still has real world consequences to this day. It's a musical that is tackling not just their time in office, but some of the long-lasting issues that have led Argentina to where it is now. So there's a lot a production of Evita has to do. And I believe that Jamie Lloyd's interpretation of Evita is a case of extremes. When I say I'm mixed on the production, I really mean it, because there's things and ideas that I utterly adore. So many ideas in here that you can break down piece by piece by piece, going into so many different interpretations, looking at art in these different ways, and that's what I really love about theatre. And to give him credit, Jamie Lloyd is a director whose work is so stripped back in a way that you can do that with a lot of these things. And I think a musical like Evita really does fit that. But on the other hand, I feel like there's ideas in here that kind of miss the mark, that don't really explore some of the real meat on the bones of the story of Evita. So I'm kind of left in this weird position where I'm really being pulled in two different directions here. So much so that as I'm filming this, I still don't really know what star rating I'm giving to Evita. I'm just gonna let my speech drive me in a way, and we're gonna find out where I land at the end. What's really funny about this production of Evita is that a lot of the things that I knew about going into the production, like things that we saw in the curtain call, or imagery in different places, or obviously the big moment everyone's speaking about, were all the things I thought I was going to dislike. And yet, they're the things that I actually came out of Evita being like, wow, that's a really, really clever idea. And then a lot of the things I was like, oh, I'll forgive it, or oh, well, that might actually be the things that will really click for me, were the things I was more on the fence of. So let's go through this musical's and this production's interpretation of Evita. I'm going to kind of go back and forth a little bit on things I liked and things I disliked. So let's start with the politics. As I discussed before, the politics of Evita are immensely complicated. They have had an impact on Argentina for decades upon decades. And this makes tackling it in a musical really deeply complicated, because you can't really spend the whole 2-hour 40 runtime just speaking about the politics, but there's so much politics to cover here that you kind of need to. So, honestly, sometimes the productions have to do the heavy lifting here. To really get to the bottom of Peron, his politics, the impact Evita had in the public image of him, their parallels, their differences, the way they both rise to power, and the parallels between that. There's so much there. There's so much meat on the bones here that you can explore through a production of Evita. And I feel like sometimes this production misses some of the politics. I think this is something that just comes naturally with stripping this back. The complexity here means that when you strip back Evita, you kind of lose a lot of the impact of some of these actions. I mean, there's a lot that Evita has to tackle here. There's the possibility of the rigged elections, there's the rise to power and how they manipulated that, there's the potential money laundering, there's the coups, the policies, and how this reshaped Argentina, especially when it comes to not just, like, their financial situation, but also their relationship with other countries. Like, there is so much here. Like, there's a lot to read into. It's a fascinating period of history, but equally as terrifying. My god, the parallels to right now are very scary. So there's a lot of moments here that I do enjoy. There's moments of the politics and how they're embedded into the staging and the direction where I do think it actually does click. And I'll explore one of these to start with, which is the fate of Shay. Let's say that. Let's call it that. That's Shay's fate. Title card. Shay spends a lot of this musical criticising Eva and Peron and the administration, and like other members of the press and the public who criticised the administration, he finds himself a member of the Forgotten Brigade. This is represented in this production by some members of the army pouring blood all over him, a symbolism of torture, of pain, of violence, and then it's immediately covered up by white and blue paint, the colours of the Argentinian flag, and the colours of the mountains of confetti that was poured all over the audience. This is what ended up in my bag at the end of the night. But I really love this idea from a visual perspective and from that kind of standpoint of what this represents when it comes to this type of regime. I think there's a lot of real world parallels to even now in politics, and the kind of covering up this brutality, the horrors, by this idea of patriotism. The torture, the blood being poured all the way down him is kind of covered up, lessened in a way, hidden by the colours. These colours that are associated with this flag, with this administration, with this patriotism, being used to silence what they're actually doing. That's a really cool idea, and you can see as you look into this, and as you look into just a simple choice in staging, how much meaning you can pull out of it. And that's just me. That's just me watching this. You could watch this and get a slightly different interpretation. You could see so many different outlooks and ways that you can pull these different ideas from this choice of staging. I love theatre as an art form for doing things like this, for challenging work that makes you think about what it's trying to say. That's where I think it gets the politics really, really right, and where a lot of the ideas have so many different meanings. But I feel like often this production struggles to make every single idea feel as poignant as that. A lot of the death in the production is represented by popping balloons. We see this through the art of the possible, as Peron is rising through the ranks. We even see this to represent Eva's death at the end as well. And it feels a little bit muddled with what it's trying to do in places. And I feel like a lot of these moments are very drawn out and kind of don't get the brutality that I feel like I really got from Shay's fate. And a knock-on effect on that is that you don't really see the full extent of Peron's brutality. You don't see the full extent of what he does to maintain his power and to gain the power. It kind of weakens him in a lot of different ways, and that feels a little bit of a shame. I think this is probably the one that I'm most mixed on, and that's why I'm starting with it. Because there are moments where I do think it has a lot of great ideas and a lot of moments that really did speak to me, and I was like, here's all of this different meaning that you can pull out of it. And then other moments where I was like, I don't really like that approach, which I think is kind of part and parcel of what you're going to get with as an extreme production of this, as something that is trying to take a massive swing. I'm never mad with a production that tries to do something really, really different with material, and I do think Jamie Lloyd is very good at that. But I don't think every idea here gets the right impact. And I think if we're stripping this right down to the basic effects, I think not quite showing the full extent of Peron's brutality kind of muddies what you're wanting an audience to feel about him, to feel about the regime. Especially because Evita herself, in a lot of ways, because of the public perception of her, is presented throughout this musical as a little bit more black and white. You really do need that other side of things, which is a lot of what Evita presents through Peron as a person. And Ava's almost complicity in that. You can kind of see how complicated the politics of this is. There's so much here, and there's so much to dive into that sometimes I don't think it quite hits. But another thing I want to speak about is Eva herself. Eva as a figure, as a political figure, and how this musical represents her. We get a large span of Eva Peron's life through the musical of Evita. We start when she's 15, when she moves to Buenos Aires, her slow rise in the ranks, how she manages to get a lot of this power, and eventually her meeting Peron, becoming the First Lady of Argentina, and rising up and up and up because of that in popularity. This spans almost her entire adult life. And the overall vision of this production to show this growth and this change is by presenting Eva as this pop star figure, as someone like a headliner at Coachella. And I think on paper this is a great idea. I think sometimes it's quite hard to conceptualize why she was as adored as she was, and honestly, why she is still as adored as she is. And by grounding it here, by giving this pop star lens to it, it allows a modern audience to more so relate. That's a great idea, and something really cool that this production is going with how it wants to present Eva Peron. A really interesting and different idea that manages to underline a lot of the key themes of Eva Peron, her life, and her legacy. But, and the big but about this, is that there's not really that growth in this production. A more traditional staging of Evita would show you the typical growth that Eva Peron goes through. Starting poor, moving to Buenos Aires, building herself up more and more and more, marrying Peron, and then eventually you see her in the big old dress, the classic hair that we know, the image of Evita that is most celebrated and most iconic. You have that build-up. However, here, you don't really have that. She starts the musical in a very Coachella-esque crop top and shorts. And her growth through the musical is that at the start of Act 2, she changes into a sparkly version of the same costume. So it's not like there's no change, but it doesn't feel significant enough. It doesn't feel like it matches quite to the level of the growth that we see from other productions. And because of that, I feel like some of the idea is slightly undermined. There's ways to do it here. And I feel like it's hard in a production that wants to strip everything back so much to do this. But even if, let's say, the simplest change that we can make, even if her costume started, even a little bit more like the Regent Park version, where it's that slip dress, quite simple, quite bare, and then eventually she becomes more of the pop star look in Act 2, I feel like that would have been a more significant growth. And at the end of the day, making it feel more earned. Because we as an audience want to see this shift in Eva Peron. As she grabs this power, as she takes it, as she abuses it in places. As her ego builds as well, and we see more and more clearly the real Eva underneath. So again, it's a great idea, but some of the execution here just doesn't quite land. There's definitely ways to adjust it or change it ever so slightly to build it up a little bit more. But for me, I love the idea, but it fell flat. Now, what I'm not on the fence about is the presentation of Cher and Evita's relationship.
Yes, I did just say Cher instead of Shay. Yes, I am leaving it into the edit because it's absolutely hilarious. Eva, snap out of it.
This, for me, is the crux of Evita. When I'm watching Evita, this is what I love. It's these two worldviews clashing. Now, a lot of productions will kind of go back and forth whether Shay is Che Guevara. You know, we have Mandy Patinkin, who I'm pretty sure, if I'm correct, was literally just fully dressed as Che Guevara. But we've also had many productions that like to present Shay as more of an everyman, more of a representation of critics as a whole. Which does make sense because Evita and Che Guevara never met. So it's a bit more metaphorical. Which is something that really works with Jamie Lloyd's style. Now, what's very funny is that the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre production actually was more set on him being Shay. At least drawing in the direct parallel, because the costume was him wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. So it at least drew that parallel. Here, that's kind of gone now. So we're going to go with the assumption that this production now is moving more away from the idea of him being Che Guevara, and more so him being a representation of the critics, and a representation of a different movement for Argentina. I love the rivalry that this production brings to Shay and Evita, just simply through the passing of a microphone. Them snatching it off of each other, them teasing each other when they've got it, like they've got the power. I think it also does a lot to kind of illustrate Eva's ego in a way. She definitely has a lot of pride and feels a lot of power when she's got that microphone. And when she's getting the words in and when she's the one taking the spotlight, you can kind of tell with the approach from this production that that's very much what Jamie Lloyd sees Eva as. And their back and forth conflicts with each other, the little interjections are really well staged and handled. I love how they both get to react and have these moments to really feel the impact of each other's words and each other's worldviews. And that all comes to a head so perfectly by the time you get to that waltz and they're both kind of going back and forth from each other more succinctly, allowing that relationship to kind of fully come to a head before we get to Evita's end. So that I really, really enjoyed. And the other thing I really enjoyed is the big thing. The thing that's got everyone talking. If you speak to your mum right now and mention the word Evita, even if she knows nothing about musical theatre or the world of the West End right now, she likely knows about Rachel Zegler walking out onto the balcony. So, let's talk about it. I want to start first talking about why I was worried about it. And the reason I was worried about this choice when I was first seeing images was because it was a very clear shift from what the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre production was going for. Eva Peron, in the classic look, what we associate her with, walking out onto the balcony. That felt like it didn't match the production that this was based on. So obviously, as someone who didn't really know anything about what this production was going to be like, my presumption was, oh, are we getting a more classic Evita look now? Are we having this? Are we having that? I wasn't really worried about, people not being able to see it live in the room. Well, I understand the argument there. I mean, you can just go see it live. Just go outside. It's not like they're singing it in a dressing room. Like, you can still see it live. It's there. But yeah, my fear was more about the production that this was based on and a clear shift away from that. Which, now I've seen it, isn't the case. So my worries, null and void. Actually, it kind of does the opposite of my worries, which is fantastic. Because with this, Jamie Lloyd gets to kind of have his cake and eat it too. I think it's very easy to moan about filming in a Jamie Lloyd production, or stripping things back in a Jamie Lloyd production, or this, that, and that, which is part and parcel with a Jamie Lloyd production. I can understand people getting tired of it, or people feeling like there's kind of been an oversaturation of it, but I think as long as you can draw a clear meaning, as long as there's meat on the bones, I don't mind if it's a similar idea. And I think that is very true for the balcony scene here. Because we get a moment where we actually get a really meta take on Evita as a figure. And just like how an idea like the costuming and the presentation of Eva shows an audience the spectacle and the feeling of the Argentinian people at that time and why they were so obsessed with Eva as a figure, this gives us another perspective into that. As Eva, dressed in the classic look that we know, stands on the balcony and performs for free to a huge crowd. More and more people are hearing about this. More and more people are going during the performance to watch on the streets. It was shocking. As an audience member sitting there, as the camera slowly turned following Rachel Zegler's Eva and turning to show the entirety of Argyle Street full, packed, people literally standing shoulder to shoulder with each other, it gives an actual representation in the middle of the West End of this fantastical feeling that Eva Peron gave to the Argentinian people. Her power as a political figure, and why she was so adored, just by simply staging a moment on a balcony. And I really love how you can watch this in the theatre and watch it outside, and you get two massively different perspectives. You get two giant changes. It makes it really worth it, actually, to go back on another day and stand outside and watch Rachel Zegler do it live on the balcony, while also going to see the production as a whole, as itself. There's moments where Zegler will turn to the camera, where she'll speak to direct address to the audience in the building, and then there's moments where she turns out and gives it to the crowd. You get a really different perspective. It's so interesting. It's so well staged. You also get to see the reactions of people like Shay and Peron, who are sitting on the stage throughout the entire balcony scene. And of course, the upper class of Argentina who come in afterwards to give their perspective. There's so much meaning here that can be brought out of it. You have the meta-ness of it. You have the representation of how Eva was seen as a figure in Argentina. You get to have the more classic look of Eva Peron without also ruining the ideas that Jamie Lloyd wants to present on stage here, of the pop star Eva, of the spectacular Eva, of Eva at Coachella, of Eva Swift, you know? By creating that distance from what's filmed and what is live in front of you. See, that's where I love Jamie Lloyd's work. That's where it really, really clicks. These are similar ideas. These are things that he has done before. But it's about taking these tactics and these ideas and applying it in a way that can bring out different meaning. I don't care if it's similar to when Tom Francis walked around the building for Sunset Boulevard, if it works for the production. Hell, I'd argue that actually the meaning of this filming works better here than Sunset Boulevard did. Because Sunset Boulevard just felt like a spectacle, whereas this more so feels like spectacle mixed with a lot of meaning. If you can't tell, I really love this idea. I thought it really, really worked. However, we have to speak about the other filming in Evita, because as much as I really, really loved that moment, all of the other filming felt a little bit null and void. It felt a little bit unneeded. Whereas Sunset Boulevard really worked with everything being filmed, because it was a production about filmmaking. It was about cinema. It feels like the other filmed moments in Evita are there because they wanted to keep using the technology, and just because they had it. I don't mind the filming moments in High Flying Adored as we see the transition from, you know, the classic Eva look back into the one that's going to be presented on stage. I understand why that needed to be more filmed and why they wanted that to be filmed. But it's also like the political speech that Eva gives later on that's filmed live on stage. It's also, I mean, even like the very start of Act 2 when we have the speech from Peron, which is just a close-up on his face. Those kind of feel a little bit less necessary. And because of that, I didn't really love them as much as I love that balcony scene. Sometimes, and honestly, a director like Jamie Lloyd does know this, less is more. The final thing I'll speak about is the one thing I don't really love about Evita. While this is one of my favourite Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, while I really do love it, the second Money Keeps Rolling In ends, it really struggles to keep the pace. This is not a problem just with this production, but with Evita as a whole. I think it's more accurate to say after the waltz than after Money Keeps Rolling In. But like from the moments where we start to see Ava's health deteriorate, it goes really, really slow. We get ballad after ballad after ballad, and because of that, the pace really does suffer, and it feels very drawn out. And I think even here, I think the production kind of struggles to keep up with the politics. You know, there are key moments here that could have been explored a little bit stronger, like the army kind of starting to reject Evita, to reject Eva as a figure and call on Peron to lean on her less. And the idea that, you know, Peron is nothing without her. We get the whole idea of her wanting to be vice president, of her trying to keep building and building and building and not slowing down. But it feels like a lot of the staging becomes quite stagnant here, and especially in a production that is so electric and so energetic, it's such a sudden shift that I'm not sure it quite clicked. But as I said, that's kind of a feeling I have about Evita anyway. Not just an issue that is solely on this production. So in the end, you can kind of see why I'm so mixed on it. Because there's things here that really, really work. There's ideas that are fantastic, and there's so much meaning you can pull out of it more and more and more. But it also feels like there's ideas that kind of miss the mark, and ideas that I didn't love as much. Trademarks of Lloyd's work that feel a little bit less well integrated than others. It's a musical in a production of really high highs, and moments where it kind of does fall a little bit more flat. What doesn't fall flat, and what I can wholeheartedly say is phenomenal throughout the entire thing, is Fabian Aloise's choreography. Oh my fucking god. Pardon my French, but I had to say it. This is his show. This is some of the finest work I've seen from Fabian Aloise. This is spectacular. He brings such an electric energy to this show that absolutely makes it. From Buenos Aires, which is like our first taste of how explosive this production can be, to every number that follows it, these huge sequences, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, with these sharp movements, this clear thought about the whole group and this stage image. If you had any worry about a simplistic production, it is immediately shoved to the side into the mud when you see what Fabian Aloise does on the Palladium stage with his choreography. This huge ensemble across this tiered staging, just absolutely shining. I mean, New Argentina, the choreography and the staging and this protest and this ferocity of this movement, you feel it. Not just with the absolute 10 tons of mountains of confetti that is falling into your face, but also with how that entire group feels connected. These huge signs, this punchy staging. You have something like Rainbow High. A moment where I feel like this is like the head of Eva and that pop star fantasy. Her dresses almost becoming like background dancers to her, swarming her, building and building and building. every single number has such an electricity to it when Fabian Aloise is let off the leash. I don't have a single bad word to say. This is outstanding work. So much so that, like, I could not help but get on my feet. This is one of the few shows I have seen outside of a press night to get a standing ovation. That's not something we do. We, as a British audience, like to keep ourselves quite reserved. We wait for our standing ovations at the end of the show. No. This got standing ovations at Buenos Aires. This got a standing ovation at the end of Act 1 with New Argentina. If you can get a British audience on a non-press night to give a standing ovation, you know you've done something right. Going from that to the set and the costume, it's very classic Lloyd. You know, it's stripped back, it's slightly modern, it's mixed in different ways. Obviously, we have the more classic Eva look, which is very cleverly done in moments where she's not on stage until the very, very end. Out of the costumes, I enjoy the army ones. I like the kind of efficient look with, like, the sleeveless arms. Not just because I enjoyed looking at the sleeveless arms, but it kind of allowed that kind of efficient army look to blend in with everything else. But the other costumes, I'm not as sold on. I've told you about what I feel about Rachel Zegler's costume for Evita. I think with this production and their depiction of Shay, what they're going for in this version, while I do miss the Che Guevara t-shirt, I do think stripping it back and making it as simple can be works for what they want to achieve. But it is some of the ensemble outfits that disappointed me the most. I understand why the main ensemble dresses look a little bit cheap. Because look, they're the descamisadas, they're the poor of Argentina. Like, of course they're not going to be dressed luxuriously. But then the costumes that they wear for the rich of Buenos Aires, for the upper class, they also look really cheap. So, I can't really defend it there. Like, they just kind of put on these cheap-looking gold, like, pieces, and, like, overdresses and waistcoats, which gives the idea visually, but the second you kind of look a little bit closer at those costumes, you can kind of see that, no. The set, I'm a little bit more favourable of. The staircase gives the pop concert aesthetic that this production wants, especially on the stage of the Palladium, where it's like massive, where these Evita sign in the background is shining, where the lights underneath these panels blast out and the smoke rises through it. It very strongly gives that concert feel that this production is going for, blended with the amazing lighting design and everything. So yeah, costumes, not a massive fan, but sets, I enjoyed. Like a lot of my thoughts with Evita, I guess. And finally, let's speak about this cast, starting with our lead, Rachel Zegler as Eva Peron. What a star. She hasn't got just a touch of star quality, she's got it all. Zegler has so much power from the second she stands on that stage. She doesn't need to say a word, your eye is on her. There's so many layers to her depiction of Eva, which is perfect for this musical's very complicated telling of her story. The little glances she gives to Shay, the playfulness of her delivery, and the power she has in her vocals, absolutely stunning. She carries all of these very difficult musical theatre numbers like they're nothing. Like it's causing her no effort at all. Like it's coming to her like that. Her Buenos Aires is stunning. Her Don't Cry For Me Argentina is so beautiful, and you get all of these amazing close-ups. It's a difficult song to do, but even more difficult when you're doing it direct to a camera, as well as also giving it to an entire crowd of people. That's a very difficult balance to strike, making it intimate, but also giving it to that whole crowd. She's amazing at incorporating some of those classic mannerisms of Evita into her portrayal. So while a lot of the costume and a lot of the staging choices bring us more far away from the classic Eva Peron we know, there's still that glance and that hint of it underneath. Fantastic. She is an absolute star. And she is perfectly matched with her Shay, played by Diego Andres Rodriguez. You can have the best Eva in the world, but if you don't have a strong Shay to contrast, to back her up, to be just as strong a match of her, you haven't succeeded. This succeeds massively. Diego is a perfect shout for Shay. A fantastic casting choice, coming straight from the US from Jamie Lloyd's Broadway transfer of Sunset Boulevard. He matches her energy perfectly, managing to cut through a lot of her bullshit. He plays such a perfect foil, but also has so many moments where he gets to stand up on his own. I love these moments, these final moments of criticism, after he's been covered in the blood and the paint, as he's lying on the floor, just speaking very quietly into a mic. The power of his delivery of these moments, of these final pieces of criticism, as he's saying how Argentina has gone from strength to poverty, how Eva's movement, while it seemingly benefits the poor, has not. How Argentina has isolated itself more and more and more because of the events of stuff like the Rainbow Tour, when she didn't feel loved enough by the British or the French. The slight shakiness in his voice, the slow, methodical delivery, really bringing in that impact. A phenomenal portrayal. And one that I feel like is not getting enough love from comments from this production. But beyond our two leads, we also have our supporting cast members. James Olivia's as Juan Perón, a very powerful and stern portrayal. As I said, I did feel in moments some of the brutality of Peron was lost due to some of the staging, but a lot of this was helped by the delivery of James here. He is a phenomenal performer. Very powerful on stage. We have Aaron Lee Lambert as Magaldi, the first love affair for Eva, and a character who is very often mocked in different performances. Vocally, Lambert is amazing. I saw him play George Washington in Hamilton, so I just knew. I knew his vocals were going to be great. My favourite little playful moments is when he's doing his big note, his big long-held note in Night of a Thousand Nights, where he pulls the mic back and forth from his mouth, trying to earn the affection of this crowd who just absolutely cannot stand him. A smaller role, but a very memorable performance. And the other small supporting role in Evita, but just as memorable, is the Mistress, played in this production by Bella Brown, giving us a really human moment, and the effects of Ava's aspirations, performed phenomenally by Bella Brown here. Her vocals are so beautiful and haunting. And finally, I just want to shout out this entire ensemble. This choreography is insane. There is so much this ensemble have to do. They are so connected as a troupe, as a group. This is the type of staging and choreography where if you put a single foot out of line, everything falls apart. But they are spot on. They are perfect. So, coming towards the conclusion, I wanted to really love this production of Evita. And it's difficult to give this a final note, because how do I weigh the things that really, really work, the fantastic choices here, with the things that fell flat? I think it is worth it. I will prefer a production to take a big swing and miss in places, but still manage to have a couple of hits, than just have an okay run-of-the-mill production. And this is anything but a run-of-the-mill production, because I still found myself amazed by these performances, finding so much meaning in certain moments, and getting wrapped up in the spectacle, the choreography, these moments that literally had me on my feet mid-show. But this is a type of theatre that is very much to be interpreted, very much there for you to build your own opinions. So, what do you think? Have you seen this version of Evita? Did you see it at Regent's Park? I'd love to hear people who saw both productions and your thoughts on both and how the changes have affected your views. Let me know all your thoughts on this musical in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now, and a link to my Instagram if you'd like to drop me a follow over there. And a huge thank you to the channel members for your support and for keeping the lights on around here. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!